The sun had just begun to rise over the sprawling fields of Green Valley Farm, casting a golden hue over the rows of crops that stretched as far as the eye could see. Tom, the owner of the farm, was already up and about, preparing for another long day of work. He climbed onto his tractor, the engine roaring to life as he adjusted his hat and gripped the steering wheel. The morning air was crisp, and the smell of fresh earth filled his lungs. It was going to be a good day, or so he thought. As Tom guided the tractor down the dirt path that led to the fields, he suddenly hit the brakes hard, his jaw tightening as he stared ahead. Right there, smack in the middle of his farm road, sat a shiny red sedan, blocking his way completely. The car looked out of place, like a brick wall in the middle of his peaceful countryside. Tom's knuckles turned white on the steering wheel as he tried to make sense of the situation. At first, he thought maybe someone had broken down, but when he looked closer, he saw her. Standing beside the car, arms crossed and sunglasses perched on her nose, was Linda. She stood there as if she owned the place, her posture defiant, her expression unreadable behind the dark lenses. Tom exhaled sharply, gripping the tractor's lever as he rolled forward slowly. Maybe, just maybe, she would come to her senses and move before he had to get down and deal with this nonsense. But of course, that was wishful thinking. Linda didn't budge. If anything, she squared her shoulders, as if she was expecting a battle. Tom let out a low chuckle, shaking his head. "Morning, ma'am," he called out, keeping his voice level but with a hint of irritation buried underneath. "Mind moving your car?" Linda scoffed, flipping her sunglasses up onto her head. "Oh, this is your land, huh? Last I checked, roads are public property." Tom took a deep breath, forcing himself to stay calm. He had dealt with Linda before. She was always complaining about the dust from the fields, always claiming the farm equipment was an eyesore from her pristine suburban neighborhood down the road. But blocking his tractor? This was a new level of ridiculousness. "This ain't a public road," Tom said, gesturing toward the dirt path. "This is private property, and you're standing right in the middle of it. So, I'm going to ask again, move your car." Linda folded her arms tighter, tilting her chin up. "No. I was taking a nice scenic drive, and I have just as much right to be here as you do. I'm enjoying the view." Tom let out a short, humorless laugh. "Enjoying the view? Ma'am, you're parked in the middle of an active work site. You're blocking my tractor. Maybe you should just wait." Linda shot back, unfazed. "You farmers think you own the whole world. I pay taxes. That means I help pay for this land too." Tom's eye twitched. He had heard some ridiculous things in his time, but this was a new one. He rubbed his temples, glancing over at his farm hands, who had stopped working to watch the show unfold. A couple of them exchanged bets under their breath, clearly enjoying the spectacle. "Look, lady," Tom said, his patience thinning. "I'm not going to argue with you about property laws, but I've got work to do, and you're in my way. Either move, or I'll move it for you." Linda's face twisted with a smug grin, as if she had just won some imaginary debate. "You wouldn't dare touch my car," she said, her voice dripping with confidence. Tom stared at her for a moment, then let a slow smirk spread across his face. "All right then." Without another word, he turned on the tractor's engine and revved it up. The deep rumbling sound vibrated through the ground. Linda's smirk faltered just slightly, but she held her ground. She really thought he was bluffing. Tom eased the tractor forward, positioning it carefully. The front loader came down, sliding neatly under the front end of the car. He lifted it just a few inches off the ground, enough to make a statement, but not enough to cause damage. Yet, Linda's eyes went wide. Wait. What are you doing?" she shrieked, suddenly running toward the vehicle as if she could stop it with sheer willpower. Tom didn't answer. He lifted the car a little higher, tilting it ever so slightly. The farmhands erupted into laughter, one of them even pulling out his phone to record the spectacle. Linda flailed her arms like a windmill in a storm. Put it down. Put it down right now." Tom finally spoke, his voice steady as ever. "Oh, I thought you were enjoying the view." Linda stomped her foot, looking around frantically as if searching for backup. "This is illegal. I'm calling the police." Tom sighed, rolling his eyes. "Go right ahead." She fumbled with her phone, her fingers shaking as she dialed. Tom didn't stop. He moved the tractor carefully, shifting the car off the road and setting it down gently in a nearby patch of grass. The whole time, Linda shrieked into her phone like a banshee. Yes, yes. This crazy farmer just picked up my car with a tractor. He's committing a crime. Send someone immediately. Tom hopped down from his seat, dusting off his hands. There. Problem solved. Linda spun toward him, her face red with fury. You are finished. Tom tilted his hat back, smirking. We'll see about that. Within minutes, a sheriff's deputy arrived, pulling up in a squad car. It was Officer Harris, a man Tom knew well. The officer stepped out, taking one look at the situation, the tractor, the slightly displaced sedan, and Linda, who was pointing and yelling like she had just witnessed a felony. Officer, he picked up my car with that. She jabbed a finger toward the tractor as if it were a murder weapon. He moved it without my permission. Harris raised an eyebrow, then turned to Tom. You damage it? Tom shook his head. Nope, just moved it out of my way. The deputy exhaled through his nose, rubbing his temples. Ma'am, why were you parked here in the first place? Linda huffed. Because I have a right to be here. Harris shot Tom a look, and Tom just shrugged. Private property, Tom said simply. The deputy sighed. Ma'am, this isn't a public road. You're trespassing. Linda's jaw dropped. Are you kidding me? He picked up my car with a tractor. Harris nodded. Yeah, and now it's out of his way. Doesn't look like any damage was done, so I don't see a crime here. But you are the one trespassing. Linda's face turned from red to white. This isn't fair. Harris crossed his arms. Well, ma'am, fairness aside, I've got two options for you. You can move your car properly and leave, or I can write you up for trespassing. Your choice. Tom watched with pure satisfaction as Linda sputtered, realizing she had lost. Without another word, she stomped to her car, yanked the door open, and slammed it shut. The tires kicked up a cloud of dust as she peeled away, fuming. As soon as she was gone, the farmhands burst into cheers, laughing and clapping Tom on the back. Harris shook his head, chuckling. You sure know how to handle a situation, Tom. Tom grinned. I try. As the sheriff drove away, Tom climbed back onto his tractor, ready to get back to work. But in the back of his mind, he knew one thing for sure: Linda wasn't done yet. She never was. Tom barely had time to enjoy the peace after Linda's dramatic exit before the real storm hit. He had dealt with her nonsense before, but something told him this wasn't over. And sure enough, not even an hour later, she was back. This time, she didn't come alone. A second car, a shiny black SUV, pulled up behind her, blocking the same dirt road she had just been forced to leave. Tom groaned, rubbing his forehead as he spotted the person stepping out of the SUV. It was a man in a suit, clipboard in hand, and Linda was already pointing wildly at Tom, her mouth moving a mile a minute. Tom turned off the tractor's engine and hopped down, wiping the sweat from his brow. He wasn't in the mood for more nonsense, but he knew he wasn't getting out of this one without a fight. The man in the suit approached first, offering a polite but stiff smile. Good afternoon, sir, the man said, adjusting his glasses. I'm Mr. Thompson, an attorney representing Mrs. Carter. Tom crossed his arms. Mrs. Carter, huh? Didn't realize we were on a last-name basis now, he said, looking at Linda, who was glaring at him like a hawk watching its prey. Mr. Thompson cleared his throat. Mrs. Carter has informed me that you unlawfully moved her vehicle with heavy machinery, causing her emotional distress and potential damages to her car. Tom let out a sharp laugh. Potential damages? That car was in perfect condition when it left. And emotional distress? What about my distress, having to deal with this ridiculous nonsense while I'm just trying to do my job? Linda gasped dramatically, clutching her chest like he had just physically attacked her. This is exactly the kind of behavior I was talking about, she shouted. This man thinks he can bully people just because he drives a tractor. Tom glanced at Mr. Thompson, who looked slightly uncomfortable but still determined to go through the motions. Mr. Carter, I strongly advise you to resolve this matter before it escalates. Tom raised an eyebrow. Escalates into what? She was trespassing. I moved her car out of my way without a scratch, and the sheriff told her to leave. What exactly is left to resolve? Linda stomped her foot, her face turning red again. You should have asked my permission before touching my property. Tom shook his head, exhaling slowly. Lady, if I see a rock in my field, I move it. Your car was the rock. Simple as that. Linda let out an outraged squeal, turning to Mr. Thompson. You see? He's impossible. Mr. Thompson sighed, pinching the bridge of his nose. All right, let's take a different approach. How about we agree to a compromise? Tom smirked. I already compromised. I could have just pushed the car into a ditch, but I was nice enough to set it down gently. Linda threw her hands in the air. That's not a compromise. That's an attack. Tom took a deep breath, glancing around at his farmhands, who were gathered again, openly enjoying the drama. He had to admit, it was almost entertaining, if it weren't so annoying. Mr. Thompson, sensing he was losing control of the situation, took a different angle. Mr. Carter, I understand you have work to do, and Mrs. Carter has expressed concerns about access to this area. Perhaps a formal agreement could be reached to prevent future misunderstandings. Tom narrowed his eyes. What kind of agreement? Linda perked up, looking smug. I want an access route through this land, she said, her voice dripping with self-importance. A designated pathway where I can walk or drive whenever I want. That way, I won't be accused of trespassing. Tom stared at her for a long moment, then burst out laughing. You want me to give you a right-of-way through my land so you can interrupt my work anytime you please? Linda nodded, as if she had just suggested the most reasonable thing in the world. Exactly. That way, we avoid future conflicts. Tom turned to Mr. Thompson. You hear this, right? This isn't some prank. Mr. Thompson sighed. I did hear it. And legally, she doesn't have the right to demand that without compensation. Linda's face twisted. What do you mean, compensation? Mr. Thompson hesitated. You would need to purchase an easement, which would require an appraisal, negotiations, and ultimately the landowner's agreement. Tom grinned. So, in other words, she'd have to buy the right to use my land. Mr. Thompson nodded. Essentially, yes. Tom turned to Linda. All right then. You want access? I'll sell you an easement. Linda's eyes lit up. Yes. Finally, you're seeing reason. Tom pulled out his phone, tapped a few buttons, then turned the screen around to show her. That'll be $100,000. Linda's mouth fell open. What? Tom shrugged. That's the price. It's a prime access point, after all. You want it. Pay up. Linda sputtered, looking between Tom and Mr. Thompson. This is extortion. Mr. Thompson, to his credit, was trying very hard not to laugh. Mrs. Carter, he is legally allowed to set the price. That's how easements work. Linda let out a furious growl. Forget it. I'll find another way. Tom smirked. You do that. Linda whipped around and stormed back to her car, slamming the door so hard that the whole vehicle rocked. The SUV peeled out seconds later, kicking up another cloud of dust as it sped down the road. The farmhands erupted into cheers again, clapping and shaking their heads. Tom turned to them. Y'all get back to work before I start charging you for tickets to this circus. They laughed but got back to work, and Tom finally climbed back onto his tractor, shaking his head. He should have known Linda wouldn't quit that easily. And he was right, because later that night, she came back, and this time, she had a new plan. Tom had just settled down on his porch with a cold drink, enjoying the peaceful evening, when he noticed something strange near the edge of his property. At first, he thought it was just the wind rustling through the trees, but then he saw a shadow moving in the dim light. His stomach clenched. No way. She wouldn't be that stupid. He set his drink down and leaned forward, watching closely. The shadow moved again, this time near the temporary fencing he had put up earlier to keep trespassers out. His gut told him exactly who it was before he even saw her face. Linda. She was back, and from the looks of it, she was up to no good. Tom stood up, stretching his arms as he let out a slow breath. He didn't need to call the sheriff just yet. He wanted to see how far she was willing to take this. Moving quietly, he stepped off his porch and made his way toward the field, keeping to the shadows. As he got closer, he could hear muttering. This is ridiculous. He thinks he can block me out? I'll show him. Tom smirked to himself. Yep, she was trying to remove the fence. He could see the glint of something in her hand, bolt cutters. She was cutting through the wire, her movements frantic but determined. Tom took another step, his boots crunching against the dirt. Linda froze, then whipped around, eyes wide like a deer caught in headlights. Evening, Tom drawled, crossing his arms over his chest. Linda's face went from panic to anger in half a second. You have no right to keep me out of this land. Tom raised an eyebrow. I'm pretty sure that's exactly what property ownership means. Linda huffed, gripping the bolt cutters tightly. You don't get it, do you? You can't just claim land and keep people from using it. That's not fair. Tom let out a short laugh. Lady, this ain't a community park. This is my farm. My business. And you're trespassing. Again. Linda's nostrils flared. I wouldn't have to trespass if you'd just given me access like a decent neighbor. Tom shook his head. You're really doubling down on this, huh? You know, most people, when they realize they've lost, just take the L and move on. Linda jabbed a finger at him. I don't lose. Tom smirked. Oh, you're about to. Before she could respond, the rumbling sound of an engine broke through the night. Linda turned her head, confused. Then she saw them. Two of Tom's biggest tractors, slowly rolling forward, piloted by a couple of his farm hands. They weren't moving fast, but they were positioned perfectly, one coming in from the left, the other from the right, closing off her only escape route. Linda's expression twisted into something between outrage and panic. You can't do this. This is harassment. Tom shrugged. Looks like you're stuck. Linda spun around, looking for a way out, but it was too late. The tractors had boxed her in. She was trapped between them, the fence, and Tom. Then, just to add to the situation, a familiar set of flashing blue and red lights appeared down the road. The sheriff's deputy had arrived. Linda let out a strangled noise. No, this is not happening. Tom chuckled. Oh, it's happening. The squad car came to a stop, and Officer Harris stepped out, his expression already tired. He took one look at Linda, the fence, the bolt cutters in her hand, and then at Tom. Tom, Harris said, rubbing his temples. I had a feeling I'd be back here tonight. Tom nodded. Yeah, me too. Harris sighed and turned to Linda. Ma'am, tell me you have a good reason for being out here with a set of bolt cutters on someone else's property. Linda crossed her arms, her whole body shaking with anger. I was just making sure he wasn't trying to cheat me out of my rights. Harris blinked. You're what? Linda's voice pitched higher. I should be allowed to use this land. He's being unreasonable. I was just checking the fence to see if it was legally installed. Harris exhaled through his nose. Ma'am, that's not how the law works at all. Linda stomped her foot. You're all conspiring against me. This is small-town corruption. Harris took out his notepad. Ma'am, you're trespassing again, and now you've damaged private property. That's vandalism. Linda's jaw dropped. Vandalism? It's just a fence. Harris flipped a page in his notepad. And the last time I checked, damaging a fence on someone else's property is a crime. Linda shook her head wildly. This is insane. You can't arrest me for this. Harris looked unimpressed. Actually, I can. Linda let out a shriek as Harris pulled out his handcuffs. No, I will not be treated like a criminal. Tom just watched, thoroughly entertained, as Harris gave her the standard spiel about trespassing laws while she tried to argue her way out of it. But the moment Harris clicked the cuffs around her wrists, her fight turned into full-blown hysteria. You'll regret this. You'll all regret this, she screamed as Harris led her toward the squad car. Tom tipped his hat. See you around, Linda. She kicked at the dirt as she was shoved into the back seat, still screaming about her so-called rights. The door slammed shut, muffling her voice just enough for Tom to finally enjoy the peace and quiet. Harris walked back over, shaking his head. She really doesn't know when to quit, huh? Tom sighed. Nope, but at least now she'll have some time to think about it. Harris nodded, making a note in his pad. We'll book her for trespassing and property damage. Might be enough to keep her off your land for good this time. Tom smirked. I won't hold my breath. The squad car pulled away, the flashing lights disappearing down the road. The farmhands, who had been watching from a distance, finally let out whoops of laughter, clapping, and cheering. Tom turned to them. All right, that's enough fun for one night. Y'all get some sleep. We've got work to do in the morning. The men chuckled but started heading back toward the barn. Tom lingered for a moment, taking one last look at the broken section of the fence. He'd fix it in the morning. For now, though, he was just going to enjoy the fact that, at least for tonight, Linda was finally someone else's problem. Epilogue. The next morning, as the sun rose over Green Valley Farm, Tom was already up and about, repairing the damaged fence. The events of the previous night were still fresh in his mind, but he had a feeling that Linda's antics were far from over. Still, for now, he could enjoy the peace and quiet of his farm, knowing that he had stood his ground. As he hammered the last nail into place, he heard the sound of a car approaching. He turned, expecting to see Linda again, but instead, it was Officer Harris. "Morning, Tom," Harris said, stepping out of his squad car. "Just wanted to let you know, Linda's been charged with trespassing and vandalism. She's facing some hefty fines, and if she steps foot on your property again, she'll be looking at jail time." Tom nodded, a small smile playing on his lips. "Thanks, Harris. I appreciate it." Harris tipped his hat. "No problem. You take care now." As Harris drove away, Tom turned back to his farm, ready to get back to work. He knew that Linda would likely find some other way to cause trouble, but for now, he could focus on what really mattered: his land, his crops, and the life he had built for himself. And as he climbed back onto his tractor, the engine roaring to life, he couldn't help but feel a sense of satisfaction. No matter what Linda threw at him, he would always stand his ground. After all, this was his farm, his home, and no one was going to take that away from him. Thank you for taking the time to listen to today's story on Store of Good Stories. If this story touched your heart or made you think, don't forget to hit like and share the video to spread this positive message to more people. And if this is your first time here, make sure to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you won't miss any of the meaningful stories we share every week. Your support is the biggest motivation for Store of Good Stories to keep bringing heartfelt and valuable stories to you. See you in the next video.